Ever felt guilty even when you clearly didn't do anything wrong? That confusing emotional weight isn't always about actual mistakes. It's often about psychology, conditioning, and how your brain processes responsibility and fear. Guilt can be triggered by past experiences, people-pleasing habits, or even distorted thinking patterns that make you question yourself unnecessarily. In this video, we'll explore why your mind creates guilt out of nowhere, and what it really means when you feel responsible for things that aren't your fault. Today we will talk about why you feel guilty when you do nothing wrong. So before we start, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. 1. The paradox of unjustified guilt. Feeling guilty usually makes sense when someone has done something harmful or wrong, but many people experience guilt even when they have not violated any moral rule. This type of guilt is often described as free-floating guilt or irrational guilt. It creates an internal paradox. Your logical mind says you are innocent, yet your emotional system still signals wrongdoing. This disconnect can feel confusing and exhausting because guilt is designed to push people toward correction. But in this case, there is nothing to correct. Instead, the mind keeps searching for a mistake that does not exist, creating emotional tension and self-doubt. Unjustified guilt often shows up in everyday situations, like resting instead of working, saying no to someone's request, setting boundaries, or simply prioritizing personal needs. Even though these actions are normal and healthy, the emotional brain may interpret them as wrong due to deeper psychological patterns formed over time. 2. Cognitive distortions and mental filtering. One of the main psychological reasons for unnecessary guilt is cognitive distortion, patterns of thinking that twist reality. A common distortion linked to guilt is over-responsibility, where a person assumes they are responsible for outcomes they cannot control. For example, if someone feels unhappy after you decline a request, you might wrongly believe you caused their discomfort, even though their emotional reaction is not your responsibility. Another distortion is all-or-nothing thinking, where behavior is judged as completely good or completely bad. In this mindset, resting becomes laziness, and self-care becomes selfishness. The brain filters out neutral or positive interpretations, and only focuses on imagined wrongdoing. Over time, this mental habit trains the emotional system to produce guilt automatically, even in harmless situations. 3. Childhood conditioning and learned guilt responses. A major root of unnecessary guilt often lies in early life experiences. Many individuals grow up in environments where love, approval, or safety were conditional on behavior. If a child was frequently criticized, punished harshly, or made to feel responsible for adult emotions, they may develop a deep association between doing less or choosing self and being bad. For example, a child who is told you are selfish for resting or good children always obey may internalize these messages as emotional rules. Even as adults, these internalized beliefs continue to operate automatically. This is why guilt can feel so instinctive. It is not based on current reality, but on old emotional programming that has never been fully updated. In some cases, even subtle patterns like parents expressing disappointment through silence or emotional withdrawal can teach a child that their needs are dangerous or unacceptable. Later in life, this becomes an automatic guilt response whenever the person prioritizes themselves. 4. Anxiety, hypervigilance, and the overactive moral alarm. Anxiety plays a significant role in false guilt. When a person has an overactive threat detection system in the brain, they become highly sensitive to potential social or moral mistakes. This state is known as hypervigilance. Instead of waiting for actual wrongdoing, the brain constantly scans for signs that something might be wrong. In this condition, guilt becomes a preventive emotion. The mind tries to avoid possible rejection, criticism, or conflict by generating guilt before any real harm occurs. For example, simply taking a break might trigger thoughts like I should be doing more, or people will judge me, even when no one is actually judging. This internal alarm system is exhausting because it confuses possibility with reality. The brain acts as if imagined criticism is already happening, and guilt becomes a way to preemptively punish oneself to avoid external punishment. 5. Social comparison and invisible pressure. Modern life intensifies guilt through constant comparison. Social media, workplace expectations, and cultural narratives often showcase productivity as a measure of personal worth. When people compare their private reality to others' curated highlights, they may feel like they are not doing enough, even when they are meeting normal standards. This comparison creates relative guilt, a feeling that arises not from actual wrongdoing, but from perceived inadequacy. If others appear more productive, more disciplined, or more successful, the mind can interpret rest or normal pacing as failure. The emotional brain does not evaluate fairness. It only reacts to perceived gaps in status or performance. Over time, this creates a habit where simply existing without constant achievement feels wrong, reinforcing guilt even during normal human rest cycles. 6. Neurobiology of guilt and emotional misfiring. From a neurological perspective, guilt involves the interaction of several brain regions, including those responsible for empathy, decision-making, and threat detection. Sometimes these systems become miscalibrated. The same neural circuits that help us understand harm and maintain social bonds can mistakenly activate even when no harm has occurred. Stress hormones like cortisol can also heighten emotional sensitivity, making neutral situations feel morally charged. When the brain is under chronic stress or fatigue, it becomes more likely to misinterpret internal signals as evidence of wrongdoing. This is why guilt often increases when a person is tired, overwhelmed, or emotionally drained. In essence, the brain's moral alarm system becomes overly sensitive, firing signals of guilt even in safe and harmless situations. This is not a moral failure, it is a biological overreaction. 7. OCD traits, perfectionism, and scrupulosity. In some individuals, guilt without wrongdoing is linked to perfectionism or obsessive-compulsive traits, especially a subtype known as scrupulosity. This involves excessive concern with being morally perfect or avoiding even the slightest perceived wrongdoing. In such cases, the mind constantly evaluates thoughts, actions, and intentions for moral flaws. Perfectionism intensifies this by setting unrealistically high standards. Rest, mistakes, or normal human limitations are interpreted as failures. Even neutral thoughts can be judged harshly. The result is persistent guilt that is disconnected from actual behavior. This pattern creates a cycle. The more a person tries to correct the guilt by overthinking or overcompensating, the stronger the guilt becomes. The mind learns that guilt demands attention, even when it is not justified. 8. Breaking the cycle and relearning emotional truth. Overcoming unjustified guilt requires retraining the mind to distinguish between real wrongdoing and learned emotional responses. One of the most important steps is recognizing that guilt is not always a reliable indicator of moral failure. Sometimes it is simply a conditioned reflex or anxiety response. Gradually challenging distorted thoughts helps weaken the guilt cycle. For example, replacing "I am bad for resting" with "rest is a normal human need" can slowly rewire emotional associations. Building self-compassion is also essential, not as self-indulgence, but as emotional accuracy, acknowledging that being human includes limits, needs, and imperfection. Over time, the brain can learn to recalibrate its moral alarm system. Guilt begins to appear only when it is appropriate, rather than constantly in the background of everyday life. This shift does not happen instantly, but with consistent awareness, the emotional system becomes more aligned with reality, allowing peace to replace unnecessary self-blame. If you liked this video and would like to see more like it, please give it the thumbs up, leave a comment, and click the button to subscribe.